Now it's time to add Oscar's eyes and nose. I like to add them early on. I've outlined Oscar's eyes with 305 Spruce Blue. I've just gone over our charcoal line, and now I'm filling in the irises of his eyes with 253 Cocoa Brown. And just coloring straight, coloring book style, just to fill that color in. Cocoa Brown is a nice warm brown. Next, I'm going to use some 263 Indian Red to color around the top of the iris, under the eyelid, and around the pupil. We're adding this nice warm color. Just stroke it gently with the pointed end of your pastel stick. Now the next color we're going to add is Cordovan, which is 353 New Pastel. It's a very, very dark violet brown. And I'm putting that under the lid, the upper lid, where there is a shadow, down around the corner of the iris, a little bit around the pupil. Mainly, though, I want to darken under the upper lid of each eye. Very light pressure, gentle, soft stroke. Just putting that dark brown in. Now I'm going to use my 229 Black New Pastel, and I'm outlining Oscar's eyes one more time with black. Carefully stroking out a little bit of color out from around the eye, feathering it out very softly. By putting blue underneath first, it gives a little more character to our black. Our black isn't so dead when it has that color. I'm going to outline the bottom lid. And just feather that out slightly as well. Now I'm going to add black around the pupil. Now I'm feathering this. We don't want a black hole for a pupil. You want this to be soft. And we're going to do the same thing with the other eye. Again, feathering it out. Going around the rim. And darkening the pupils. I'm adding a little more Cordovan. Feel like it needs a little darker brown in there. Feel free to add more color because you're using a light touch. You can do that. You can go back and add more color if you need it. And this is the 263 I'm using to darken the actually what will be the hair areas around Oscar's eyes. So this dark warm brown. I'm just pulling it out into the surrounding area where the hair is on both sides. That helps the eye to really be a part of the dog. By adding the darker color, the eye sits down into the fur. Now we're going to add the secondary highlight. I'm going to use some 266 pale vermilion and just lightly color it on the opposite side of where the strong highlight on the pupil is. So we're just going to put that red in, and we're going to modify that a bit with 233 raw sienna over the red. Now I'm going to carefully stroke this towards the pupil, and it becomes a beautiful orangey color. And just lightly stroke it in. If I want it to be a little brighter, I just push a little harder. It really brings the eyes to life. And I'm just doing it in this area that is opposite of the brightest highlight. I'm using my white charcoal pencil to add a little highlight to the rim and a few areas of moisture by pushing really hard on the pencil. You can add those bright white spots. And now I'm using my 211 NuPastel to add a bright highlight in the pupil. Now I'm using a Conte pencil number 29 blue to add highlight to the rim of the bottom lid. And I'm also adding it to the pupil area. I'm going to use my black to darken the pupil a little more. And again, a few bright spots to indicate moisture. And I'm drawing in an upper lid. The lid is more visible on this eye than it is the other one. I'm going to tint it slightly with raw sienna. Darken the pupil and darken underneath that edge. I'm going to use my white charcoal pencil to draw a little highlight in, and the 211 to brighten the hot spot in the pupil. Now I'm going to use the 29 Conte pencil to add a blue light in the center of the pupil, reflecting the sky. Now we're going to work on Oscar's nose. I'm using my 305 spruce blue. I'm going to outline his nose. So we want to put blue underneath the black. So this is blue, darkening the nostrils with the 305 spruce blue. And carefully drawing in his nose. The blue will give our black some depth when we add it on top. It's always good to add blue or dark purple underneath something that's going to be black. So I'm just lightly coloring that in, and I'm going a bit darker in the nostrils. And lightly covering the other areas with the blue. I'm going over the highlight area with the blue. I'm going over the entire nose lightly with the blue. Now I'm going to take my black 229 NuPastel, and I'm going to go over the darker areas. We're going to let some of the blue show through. Making that nostril very dark. I'm just shading the nose with the black. And then lightly going over the other parts, very lightly. I don't want a solid black mask because we still need to add some highlights to our nose to bring it to life. Darkening those nostrils just a little bit more with the black NuPastel. And coloring over it with the 305 blue just a little bit. Adding a little more blue to the nose. See how our white charcoal pencil still shows through? Now I'm using the 29 Conte pencil to add some highlights on the top of the nose, which is very nice. Highlighting around the nostril. Adding a little more black. Now I'm going to use my white charcoal pencil to add some light to that lower edge of the nostril. You can see it's starting to show up more. And a little bit on the top of the nose. Very lightly. The blue that we applied previously shows through the white to kind of form a light blue color. And take your time, get it just right. So I'm just kind of squiggling my pencil around. I'm going to use my white charcoal pencil to make a brighter highlight on the nose. Going back to the white charcoal pencil. That white's a little strong, so I'm going to go over it with the blue, tone it down a little bit. Now I have adding black underneath the nose for those little hairs that are under there that are black. And adding a little black to his mouth. A little black to the little hairs under his mouth. Now I'm going to deepen the brown. So I'm using the end of a 411.3 burnt sienna. We don't have enough dark color down. You have to have the darks before you can see the lights. And so we're building layers. So we had a nice medium value down. And now we're adding a fourth layer of the burnt sienna. I'm using it on its end so I can have more control over where I'm going to put it. Because of the previous layers of color, it's become very velvety now, and it's easy to apply these colors. Still using a crosshatch method. But this helps give shape to Oscar's head. So I'm going around the eyes. Between his eyes, down his muzzle, down his nose and around his muzzle, I should say. And you can see that really pops out his muzzle. It comes forward in the picture plane now that we put the dark fur underneath. Now I'm going to speed this up a little bit for you. while I add the rest of the darker brown color to Oscar. Now that we've finished adding the brown, I'm going to use a 279 Cool Gray NuPastel to add a gray tone around his nose where there's going to be white hair. So this is going to be the basis, the underneath layer of the white hair. So I'm just putting it right on top of the brown, adding another layer, and on underneath his lip, bottom of his lip, and that little corner of his mouth that just barely shows through his hair. This is a very light layer. I'm going back now to the background. I'm adding some black, which is 700.5 in Rembrandt. The black enriches the blue colors that are already laid down. The blue shows through, so we're just putting a light layer on top of it. This black is one of the best black pastels you can get. It's very rich and very black, and you can see I'm not going that far out, just staying really close to the dog, completing the background with this black. Completing the background that's next to the dog. We'll deal with the rest of the background towards the end of the painting. This is a little piece of NuPastel black that I've broken off, and I'm using it to push the black into the paper, the soft black Rembrandt into the paper with this little teeny piece of NuPastel. Because NuPastels are harder than Rembrandts, this is a very effective way of pushing the pastel into the paper and making it even smoother. I'm going to add a little more brown. With the 411-3. I see some places I need to make it a little bit darker, so I'm pushing a little bit harder. but still being very light pressured when I apply it. All these base layers that we've taken our time to put in are a setup for the light hairs that are to follow. It's really what's going to make our dog look so very real. So take your time in adding these layers. I'm using the pastel on its end rather than on its side. Going underneath his bandana and getting all of the hair covered with this nice burnt sienna. Now I'm using a dark gray NuPastel number 259 to darken around Oscar's nose a little bit. Right up next to his nose, we're making it a little darker. I darken the fur above his nose as well. Using it very lightly. And add a little bit around his eyes. Now I'm using the sharp edge of a 203 burnt sienna pastel, NuPastel. In the introductory videos, I show you and talk about sharpening these pastels to get 4 sharp edges. And by holding it 45 degrees to my paper, I can draw a nice long sharp line. And when my pastel gets dull, I just rotate it. And now I'm using a 263, which is slightly darker, the Indian red. I'm going to use the tip so I can draw in where the ear is. So I'm just kind of flat coloring that. So I'm kind of shaping the ear with the tip of my pastel. The Suit 63 is very close in color to the 411-3 burnt sienna that we applied earlier. And so it's easier to draw the hairs with this than it would be with the bigger Rembrandt pastel. So I'm just starting to put in Oscar's hairs. It's the 203 burnt sienna again. It's a little redder. You could use these same colors to paint a fox if you had a fox you wanted to paint. Back to the 263. Do you see the little white lines that we drew out initially with our white charcoal pencil? They're poking through to kind of guide the way to show us where the edges are of Oscar's beautiful hair. So I'm shaping around his eye and the side of his face. I'm going to work a little blue into that area at the top of the ear, in between where we've put the hair. So we need to get as close to the dog with the background as we can. So this is the blue-gray, the 727-3. So this about finishes our underlayers. So we're ready for part 3.